Let's do it. Let's explore shame and manage triggers. So I'm going to start by opening and with pulling your attention very directly to the opening stretch, because I know that there's people here that I know vaguely, but there's also people I don't know. And so if you're new to me, which I know some of you are over this course, because there's lots of names I don't recognize. So I'm going to explore today how internal shame is, how much it is in the body. You might think it's in your head, but actually it's entirely physical. So that's what I thought we'd look at today. So this stretch, this is the trauma therapist's stretch, and it has become the way of opening a Kundalini Global class, because what we do in the Kundalini Global class is that we learn to regulate, we learn to change how we feel. So you allow your mat to be a magical place where you gift me the possibility that you could land into being completely present. So let's just do that. So it's worth learning this stretch. Make your arms vibrate. You're pulling your hands apart. Keep breathing, raise your chest. Keep breathing, raise your chin. Keep breathing, that glorious moment as your armpits rise. And when your elbows straighten and you get to the top, take a long, deep inhale. Hold that breath. Turn as far as you can to one side with full lungs, turning your head as far as you can, and exhale. Come back to the center. Inhale. And turn as far as you can to the other side. Maybe your eyes can close, but if you don't feel safe enough, that's okay. Roll your shoulders. And take a moment. Your hands either come into prayer pose or crossed on your chest. So what you've just done is you've just released the vagus nerve. So I'm not going to do a lecture on the vagus nerve. I'm going to talk about it slightly differently. Inhale. Inhale, hold the breath, squeezing anus, sexual organs and belly. Flare the ribs, tighten under the ribs. Tighten the neck, drop the chin. These are the body locks. They are miraculous. Long, deep exhale, holding the breath out. Squeezing anus, sexual organs and belly. Flare the ribs, tighten under the ribs. Tighten the neck, drop the chin, and inhale. Holding the breath, there's still the body locks. Pull, pull, tighten, hold, and contain yourself. Make yourself belong to you. This is an interesting point. Exhale. Holding the breath out. And again, pulling, tightening, holding, and containing. And inhale. Inhale, and on the exhale, bowing forward to whatever you relate to as an internal divine source or force. Inhaling up. Bowing forward on the exhale to whatever you relate to as an external source or force. Inhaling up. Bowing forward to perhaps understanding a little bit more about exploring shame and managing triggers. And when you're ready, come sitting up. So I'm just I'm a psychotherapist and I'm fascinated by shame. I'm fascinated by shame. I'm fascinated by the vagus nerve. And one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about why yoga helps is, I'm gonna let me spotlight myself. And I am recording, great, I changed it. So one of the things that people don't particularly understand about how the vagus nerve, what happens in the body is when you're triggered, I'm assuming we all understand the word triggered, but when you're triggered into shame, when you're triggered into overwhelm, when you're triggered into anxiety, they're all part of the same spectrum of things. It's a very deep internal reaction. Everything in your body goes really fast. I mean, mind-blowingly fast. Shame is, I said it at the beginning of the first one, it's one of the worst feelings that you can have outside of the pain of loss, I think. But to go into a shame spiral is the deepest, most profound contraction within all of yourself. And it's a very magical thing. I think I also mentioned this. We hold it as a very sacred thing. And the problem is, so here's the bit that's, there's a lovely Georgian word. This is the rub. This is the painful bit about it, is that when you get anxious, when you get triggered, when you get overwhelmed, when you have a shame spiral, you drop, you become extremely young. And a lot of people don't understand this about what happens to them. When you hit anxiety and stress, your brain defaults to what you learned to do when you were young. It's a thing that we can do really fast, and very few people either notice it or actually will take any responsibility for it themselves with it. So obviously you can't expect miracles. As I said, I don't come with a pink fluffy wand. But if you can begin to understand that a shame trigger or an anxiety trigger or an overwhelm trigger is a massive contraction in the self. And when it is a deep shame spiral, because there's layers of shame, and we can feel a bit uncomfortable on camera, we can think, oh, maybe I need some plastic surgery, or I hate my figure. We can also go into really deep shame spiral. So there's degrees. The reason I want to talk about it and just contextualize it a bit is that it takes us into mechanisms. We have childhood mechanisms. This is this system called fight, flight, freeze, fold, faint, food, and flood. There's also fuck, because a lot of people will masturbate when they're anxious. It's my Zoom. I can talk about these things, and I'm a sex therapist, so that's okay. But fight, flight, freeze, fold, faint, food, fawn, and fuck, and flood. There are any number of mechanisms that we can use when we feel shame, anxiety, or overwhelm. And with shame, we will either desperately try to get the person back to us, thinking, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know, I didn't mean, I'm so sorry. Or we'll reject and we'll put in place a mechanism to make sure that they naff off, fuck off, leave us alone. So generally we fall into those two camps. It's either, please don't leave me, I'm really sorry. I really, God, please, it's awful to see that. It's terrible. Or I absolutely hate you. And one of the things that we will quite often do is we go really silent and then we close all access to us off. And of course, what actually happens is we abandon ourselves. But equally, the person who shamed you now, they may not be your father or the headmaster or whatever, whoever was the person. And it's not that they all need to be men. It was just the way the words came out. The person who shames you now, we can project everything onto them from the childhood. And actually, the person may be really shaming. And there may be a really good reason why you need to close yourself off. But quite often, these things happen in interpersonal relationships. That's where we get our biggest triggers. So then we're acting out childhood behaviors in our interpersonal relationships, because that's the main area where we can get shamed. Because actually, some completely random stranger says something. Does it really matter? No, not particularly for most people. But the person that you think should love you, or the person that you think loves you, or the person that you think you love, and you may well, and they may well, if they say something, it's to the depths of your soul. And that's what a shame trigger is. It's into the depths of your soul. It's one of the most painful things you can experience. So what I thought we'd do today is we do a series called Speak for Yourself. Because if you can get your head around the idea that if you think about how old do you feel when you're anxious, I should think most of you will say somewhere between 5 and 7. Generally, that's the answer that people give. Now, I've helped you contextualize it. So maybe you've never realized, and maybe next time you get really anxious and you're going, oh my God, I've got to fly, I don't know what to do. Whatever it is that you do, you might go, that's quite funny. I feel really de-skilled. I feel really young. I mean, you're probably not going to find it funny because you're going to believe that you're really young, but you're not. You're an adult. So this mechanism is fascinating because it takes over our brain. And then, of course, we speak from that place. We speak from the bursting into tears. We speak, fight. We get aggressive. We get angry. Flight. I'm leaving. I'm not doing this anymore. You always do this. I'm going. Fight, flight, freeze. Just like, hold your breath. Fight, flight, freeze. Fold. I'm depressed. I'm going to duvet dive. I can't cope with this anymore. We've got all these different mechanisms that they're really nothing to do with being an adult. They're very, very childish mechanisms. Sometimes they're appropriate. Sometimes and I'm totally aware that sometimes they're appropriate. And sometimes the person who's shamed you really is dangerous. But most of the time, when we get triggered, we're behaving as if we are 7 or 8 or 5, the age that some of these shames happened to us. And we lose all track of time. It's like shame becomes a time warp. It becomes a time machine. And over time, and like the first time, you might notice you got really shamed and maybe you binged on chocolate for 2 weeks. Lots of people do that. You got really shamed, and so you decided you were never speaking to that person again, or you felt you might have felt really ashamed. I'm never going into those changing rooms again, or whatever decisions you make. I'm going to eat ice cream for the rest of my life. Gradually, over time, maybe you do a bit of work on yourself. Maybe you find someone you can talk to. Maybe you get a therapist, or you do CBT or whatever. And you might find that the space after the shame spirals gets a bit less. And when you get into the space where maybe you notice you're triggered, it takes a long time to get there. As I might have said, my job is to repeat myself 1,000 times. This is hard information you have. It's hard information to assimilate because the safety mechanism says, don't be stupid, don't put me down. So this is the trauma therapist's biggest drama, is working with somebody who says, I really want to let go of my anxiety, or really want to let go of my shame. But actually the shame is constantly saying, don't you dare. Do not, because you have no idea what will happen if you put it down. So it's a really interesting, what's the word? It's like a dissonance. It's like an Ouroboros. You know, the two things are quite difficult. So there may come a point where you might realize, I've dropped into a child. I'm behaving like a child. And this is the thing that you can learn from what we're doing here is I could stretch. But then again, I could weaponize my shame. I could weaponize my trauma, and maybe I won't. So that's the big dilemma, because what we do is we perpetuate it. I'm not your therapist. This is it. I've done my talk. We're now going to look at how do you release all of that. So I thought that we do a very interesting thing, which some of you might have done with me if you've done breath work or other classes, which is a transcendental meditation. To be transcended, if we think about shame as being the deepest contraction within the self, a transcendental meditation is as if you can expand and just, you know, become gigantically huge in a way. So the opposite. And then Speak for Yourself, the series I wanted to teach, is to understand that you've dropped, to understand that you've lost yourself, to understand that you abandon yourself, and to find yourself back. It does have a shoulder stand in it. So I will show how to do a shoulder stand, but I won't take you through if you've never done a shoulder stand before. If you haven't done a shoulder stand before, I'll show you an alternative. So that's what we're going to do. I don't think I'm going to take space for questions, but have I been remotely clear? Okay. I know it's what I do, so I think it's kind of easy, but trying to digest it into something that's bite-sized pieces takes a moment. So let's do a transcendental meditation. So sit